Hello, everyone. Welcome to CPPR Dialogue on Breaking Business Barriers in Kerala, Decriminalisation of Business Laws. I'm Anu Anajo, Senior Associate at CPPR. This is a sequel to our podcast episode number 57, Breaking Business Barriers in Kerala, Decriminalisation of Business Laws. If you are new to the series, do check out the previous episode. The regulatory landscape plays a significant role in influencing businesses across their life cycle from inception through expansion and even cessation. In the course of conducting business operations, enterprises are required to comply with state, central, and local level laws. However, numerous business laws classify non-compliance, even minor procedural infractions, as criminal violations with imprisonment clauses. This approach, although intended to ensure regulatory compliances, often leads to inadvertent consequences that pose hurdles to businesses. There have been various attempts to identify such laws and bring out regulatory reforms in the country. To dive deeper into the nitty-gritty of the compliances in the business ecosystem, and especially to focus on decriminalization, simplification, and digitization of business laws, we have with us Mr. Rishi Agrawal. He is the co-founder and CEO at Teamlease Regtech. Rishi firmly believes in the power of technology to transform the way compliance is managed in India. Over the last several years, Rishi has helped over 1,000 companies in India digitally transform their compliance program. In addition, he has been working closely with different central ministries, think tanks, and industry associations to highlight India's regulatory complexity and make a case for rationalisation, simplification, and digitization. He is also the co-author of the report, Jailed for Doing Business. I am very happy to have this conversation with you today. I'm certain that this conversation will be enlightening for all our listeners. Welcome, Rishi, to this podcast.
Well, thanks a lot, Anu, for having me on the podcast. Happy to be here. I love to talk about the regulatory ecosystem and how power of technology is transforming the way entrepreneurs do business in the country.
Yes. So let me start by asking on the Jailed for Doing Business report. I know this study gained a lot of attention nationally and it was discussed widely. So what was the starting point of the study? Where did you pick this up from?
So it was about 8 to 9 years in the making, back in 2013-14 time frame, when Sandeep and I started this company called Avantis Regtech. The focus was on helping organizations stay on the right side of the law. When we started building a product, a SaaS product, we realized very quickly that there was no single database in the country which was searchable, sortable, filterable, where all the regulatory compliance and obligations of an entrepreneur are clearly delineated and where it was easy to find out what you are responsible for and not. And that got us on a long journey to start dissecting act by act, rule by rule, reading thousands and thousands of pages of regulatory documents. Just to give you an example, and this was my first exposure back in early to 2013, 2014, company Factories Act of 1948 I picked up, and one state rules I picked up, and I realized that it was a over 200-page document. And every page had a number of obligations, and every obligation had a type. Sometimes it was a license, sometimes registration, permission, NOC, consent order, return, register, challan, payments, sort of remittances, displays, committee obligations, compositions, and each one of them had specific line items, and each line item had specific procedures, requirements, penal provisions, criminality associated with them. So just to get this database going has taken us many years. A team of over 70 lawyers has continued to work for at least 7 years now to put this database in place. And when we look at this database, there are a lot of angles for research work to be done. And one of the angles that we picked up was deeply entrenched hostility and jail term in India's regulatory ecosystem. in the last 10, 15 years, the country has made some serious strides. We are among the top 5 economies of the world, and we are aspiring to be in the top 3 shortly. Prime Minister has laid a foundation for becoming a Viksit Bharat or developed nation by 2047. And all of these hinge or pivot on a very important assumption that the country will attract a lot of capital, will create an enormous number of jobs. We will become the factory to the world, just like COVID proved that we were a pharmacy to the world. Our services sector will increase dramatically. We will create a lot of formal jobs. And all of these are not going to happen in absence of serious reforms or revisiting the ease of doing business or the regulatory cholesterol in our economy. And that was the thinking behind putting this report together, saying if minor non-compliances, procedural lapses, technical lapses, minor delays have provisions for criminality and jail term, does our entrepreneur, does our job creator, does our risk taker deserve this kind of penal punishment? Or there are better ways to hold them accountable, to do the business the right way, rather than sending them or threatening to send them to jail for minor contraventions here. And that's how the study started. The grounding or the groundwork or plumbing took about 5-6 years to first go through every section, every rule, every act, union, state, local body levels, and then convert this into searchable, sortable, filterable data, and then real work of finding the needle in a haystack or dissecting what is not right with India's regulatory cholesterol started. So while the actual writing of the book took about 2 years, to get the data to write the book took about 5 to 7 additional years before that.
Right. I wanted to ask you regarding the challenges. What were the challenges during the course of the study? But now you have summed up that in one single sentence. Even though the writing took about 2 years, the actual research took about 7 years. And I think one of the major challenge you might have encountered while doing the study would have been to understand what are the laws applicable to each of the sector. I know we don't have a comprehensive place or a consolidated place where we have the set of facts. We need to do that research thoroughly to understand. So, yeah, sure.
The 2 problems that we have. First, quantitatively, the sheer number of acts, rules, and compliances are too many, right? There are 1,536 unique acts and rules that are applicable to entrepreneurs. Subsumed in them are 69,233 compliances. And then there are 26,134 that can send an entrepreneur to jail. There are about 6,618 filings, which are unique in the country across union, state, and local body levels. That's problem number 1. Quantitatively, these are large numbers. Qualitatively, the law of the land is fluid. There are over 8,000 regulatory changes in any given year. That translates anywhere between 15 to 25 regulatory changes in a day. There is no single website where these changes are published. As per our research, there are 2,233 unique websites across union, state, and local body governments which can publish regulatory changes. 437 union government, 1,240 state governments, and about 557 or so in the local body websites. A lot of these websites are not designed for user experience. Regulatory updates is hidden 4 levels, 5 levels below the home page. A lot of times when you are trying to click on a document, the document fails to open up. Many cases, the document gets archived well before the news reaches, the entrepreneur. There is no subscription to these websites where you can say if changes happen to Act A, B, and C, notify it to me. There is no searching, sorting, filtering options available. The only way you can find out about a regulatory change is by actually trying to hit the website several times a month and see if something has been published. If something got published, sometimes it can be a very long document, which is a PDF. In many cases, it is written in different languages. So, if you're looking at any state which has its own regional language, document oftentimes may be written in that language. To be able to sit in a Delhi or a Mumbai or any one of the cities in the country and read a document which is created in a different language can be a little bit of a challenge, because shall versus should can mean different things in the law. So my point, Anu, really is we don't have one problem. We have a multitude of those problems. And staying on the right side of the law, while sounds like a great thing to do, hope is not a strategy. There's a lot of work that goes into staying on the right side of the law. Inadvertently, you can easily drift on the wrong side. And that's where the complexity is far more pronounced in the real world than is often understood by policymakers and think tanks.
Right, rightfully put so. Since the report highlighted and stressed on the imprisonment provisions in the business regulation, and also it recommended for decriminalization, right? I think the media picked that up. How many compliances were there? It was all throughout. Every national media covered it up largely. So, what do you think about the decriminalization exercise? Do you think it is going in the right direction? And also, which states, according to you, is doing well in the whole exercise?
See, first of all, I would like to congratulate the government at the union level to take this up very seriously. One can publish any number of reports, and those reports can hit the national media and headlines and then die a natural death after the news cycle. It takes a lot of gumption and a lot of hard work to pick up a piece of data-driven research and say, yes, we acknowledge the presence of a problem and we think some work is required to be done, and actually set up a committee under Mr. Amitabh Kant, who was the then CEO of Niti Aayog, and actually take up decriminalization as a serious exercise, convert that into a single bill, which was one of the recommendations in our report, to decriminalize by a single bill, and then add a lot of these acts under a single bill, go through the parliament, go to the joint parliamentary committee, get their recommendations, and then make it into an act, and get the presidential assent and so on and so forth. So I would say a lot of hard work has gone into putting the infrastructure together. Union government has created a blueprint for subsequent versions of decriminalization. So from that point of view, I think the mission is very successful. However, if you look quantitatively, we are talking about 42 acts which were included and 187 provisions which were tackled. You look at the larger universe of compliances with criminalization, that is 26,134. So if you do a comparison, a small portion of all the items with criminal provisions have been decriminalized by Jan Vishwas Act. So I think the direction is absolutely correct. Speed is something that we have to work on. Now, just to put numbers in context, out of the 26,134, close to about 5,000 or so are in the purview of union government. Close to 20,000 of them are with state governments. So just union government picking up the baton and running is not going to solve this problem. States have to bring their shoulder to the load. States have to start taking this seriously in their own respective areas. The ones which are actually vying to become $1 trillion economy in their own right within the decade should certainly take the lead on this. So my point there is, I think we have made some good progress. A blueprint, a precedent has been created, a template has been presented, and that template has yielded a small outcome. But I think it has created a broad consensus in the economy that decriminalization or mindless decriminalization for employers need a serious scrutiny, needs a serious review, and a structured approach can help you remove hostility and criminality, the mindless one, from our employer compliances. So I think from that point of view, it is a big success. Now, just as a caution to all our viewers, I do want to remind them that we are not, or we have not recommended lock, stock, and barrel removal of criminal penalties. What we have said is that 30 to 40% of the items are trivial, are minor contraventions, are mindlessly written for criminalization, which have no mens rea associated with them, which don't harm the nature, which don't steal from employees, which don't include fraud and other items like that. And all of those items, there can be penal provisions for prohibitive financial penalties and stuff like that, rather than putting a criminal provision to send an entrepreneur to jail. So I just want to notify that our recommendation is not to decriminalize every provision that is out there. We firmly believe that employers need to be held accountable for the right behavior, and many items which are mentioned in the report, and I highly recommend people who are interested in the topic and who have not picked up the report to actually go through it and see where we are talking about reviewing criminal penalties and potentially bringing in compounding and financial penalties and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Since our last podcast, where we also discussed about decriminalization, some of our listeners had this question on how such a provision, which is hardly ever practiced, like they say, for the simplest of the simplest act, we don't see anyone sent to jail, or we don't see imprisonment be practiced. So could you please explain to our listeners, how does this affect businesses?
See, first of all, that logic that if it is not practiced, why decriminalize itself, we don't agree with, right? There is a concept of proportionality of the punishment with the gravity of the crime, right? If I missed filing a return, or if I filed it in the wrong format, or if I did not maintain the register in the right format, all of these, do they harm the nature? Do they steal from the employees? Is there any fraud committed? Is there any exploitation done? None of these things are true. So the proportionality of the punishment has to be in line with the gravity of the contravention committed. So that is the first thing. Many of our provisions are mindless in nature. A lot of these laws were written in 1930s and 40s. India was under the colonial rule at that time. Many of these acts were written, or India had just become independent in 1948. If you look at a Minimum Wages Act or Payment of Wages Act or Factories Act, many of these acts were written in 1940s. Our socio-economic, demographic and cultural environment was very different. Private sector was not available or around for creating any serious number of jobs. Private sector's contribution to jobs was a minuscule portion. Majority of the jobs were getting created in the public sector. The rules were written keeping in mind our socio-economic political situation back in the day. Today, things have changed dramatically. Digitization has come in. A lot of digital record keeping can happen. Information flow happens much faster than ever before. Our economies have become interconnected. Globalization has happened. We are constantly, attracting foreign direct investment so that we can create capacity in India and make India the factory to the world. And that's what will, employ hundreds of millions of Indians who are ready for a job. In conditions like this, when you are competing with the rest of the countries to attract those investments, when you are trying to sell into a global market, our approach to regulations also has to evolve as the country and times have evolved. And our point there is really to take another hard look at some of this and see if many of these items continue to stay relevant and stay current and stay in tune with the requirements of the modern day and age. There are many acts where you have to paste a notice on the notice board of a company, and that is the only evidence of compliance. This was written at a time when there was no digital access to information. Today, the last worker in the factory, even the apprentice, has access to digital platforms, including digital message boards and stuff like that. The intention of the law has to be to make information available to the end user rather than make it available on a physical notice board pasted in a particular way, in a particular format, in a specific physical location of a factory. I hope you understand the soft difference between the intention and the actual outcome. And that's where I think it is important that with the advent of digital media, internet, the platforms, messaging platforms, intranets available, we review that the evidence of compliance cannot only be to make a notice available on a notice board. The evidence of compliance can also be to make it available through various accessible platforms by employees, as an example. So I think that level of rationalization, reconciliation, hard review is required so that our regulatory environment does not become a hurdle in our. It holds the right stakeholders accountable, but does not create impediments to our growth, does not become burdensome or onerous to an entrepreneur. Someone who's putting personal capital at risk does not end up spending a lion's share of his or her time in complying with those items that have lost their relevance, where there is significant amount of duplication, irrelevance, and overlap between regulations. Just to give you an example, in our current labor laws, there are over 10 different formats of wage registers under different acts. Now, each act prescribes its own format. Ultimately, you are trying to hold the employer accountable for paying the wages and holding a record of that. Why do you need 10 different formats is my question. Can we do with one format? And I think the code on wages or the codification process is taking care of number of these items. But that's the kind of rationalization that is due in majority of our regulations, which were written a while ago, and a thorough review has not been conducted in a long time.
But as you rightly pointed out, rationalization and the digitization is the need of the hour. And I'm bringing this conversation back to the Jan Vishwas Act. So in Jan Vishwas Act, as a correction to the imprisonment, what there was imposing higher penalty was given as a solution, and imprisonments are removed and it got replaced with higher penalty. Do you think that solves the problem? Do you think it is again giving a rise to an administrative power, which can again, we have even from the report, the rent-seeking opportunities, the regulatory cholesterol. Do you think all this problem will be solved?
See, Anu, one can argue the good, bad, and ugly of every decision at every point in time. Do you think having criminal provisions in 1536 acts over 70 years has created jobs in India? It hasn't. Has it stopped corruption in 70 years while criminal penalties were still there? Did it stop any rent-seeking behavior before? So there are merits and demerits of every decision that we end up taking. The key objective is to have regulations which enable job creation and growth, rather than become hurdles in our overall progress. And I think it is very important for us to take a hard look at some of this. And while qualitatively one can say the financial penalty is high in this case or low in some other cases, and as they say, right, if I write 6, one person will see a 9 and another person will see a 6. Different people will have a different qualitative commentary on a specific decision. Personally, I would want to refrain from a qualitative review of we should do X penalty versus Y penalty. My point here is we need to take a hard look at whether a criminal penalty is required or not. And if a criminal penalty can be replaced with a financial penalty, I would prefer that, because that reduces a degree of hostility from our regulations. It clearly signals an intent that we respect job creators and wealth creators. We don't look at them with hostility. We want them to engage in the right behavior, and we want to reward the right behavior and penalize the bad behavior. Penalization with imprisonment for mindless item is really what is in question here.
Right. So we have been having discussions with a lot of stakeholders regarding this particular topic, and all of them, whatever they pointed out, is rightly resonates with whatever you are saying right now. Because all of them came forward and told us that the perspectives need to be changed, the narratives need to be changed. So this will be a starting point. It might not actually solve all the problems, but this is a starting point, and it might create an ecosystem where all the business communities are being welcomed, and eventually the compliances can fall into place. So one thing, since you have been working for many years on other regulatory challenges, for example, the simplification and digitization. So we are working in a very complex regulatory system. So how do you envision such kind of simplification and digitization? How can we bring that effectively in the Indian regulatory system?
See, it's very simple, right? The objective of the government is to make sure that employer is held accountable and there are guardrails in which they progress. The investments when they come in, financial decisions that are made, operational decisions that are made, the way the business expands, the way employees are compensated, there is fairness, there is equality, there is no discrimination, there is no harm to the environment, everything is within a regulatory guardrail is what the end intention of the law is. Our objective is to make sure that while we guard these intentions, we don't make the execution of this very onerous on an employer. For example, the example that I took earlier in this podcast, do we really need 13 different formats of wage register? Do we really need 10 different formats of leave and attendance register? Do we need 5 different formats of accident register? Can we do with one wage register, one leave and attendance register, and one accident register? Would it satisfy? But the problem is different departments of the government at different points in time prescribe their own rules. And I think 70 years have gone by since some of these things have been written, and it's time to come back to the drawing board and see if there are ways in which we can make this more and more efficient. And I think our goal here is, how do we not dilute the guardrails or standards, and at the same time make them procedurally less onerous on an entrepreneur, is so that an entrepreneur can focus on innovating, on bringing in excellence, on competing globally, on creating products and services that hold true to global standards and become globally competitive, and so on and so forth, rather than being overburdened by those regulations which don't really achieve any end objective from a controls point.
Right. So, as you mentioned, we are not here to, dilate any guardrails, but rather to change the narrative, change the perspectives, how businesses and the ecosystems are in the country. So, since you are a person who deals with compliances on every single day, and you said on an average we have so many compliances, so many regulations being changed. So, which states do you see as one of the best fit? At least we can consider that the business ecosystem is very friendly. The regulatory framework is very welcoming. It's not very restrictive. Do you have any states in mind while considering?
I'm not doing any ranking, rating, or any qualitative assessment of one state versus the other. But I'll tell you, there are 5-6 states in the country which are visibly vying to become $1 trillion economy each. You have Gujarat, you have Maharashtra, you have Karnataka, you have Tamil Nadu, you have Uttar Pradesh. These are the top 5 states who are looking to become $1 trillion economy in their own right within the decade. Most of these have a GSDP of between 200 and 400 billion dollars at the moment, and they literally have to more than double their existing size if they have to get to $1 trillion. That is not going to happen by accident. While Jan Vishwas deals with 42 union acts and 187 unique compliances, among the 26,134, only 5,000 odd compliances are under union. The remaining 20,000 are with the states. Among those, there are 5 states, including Gujarat, Punjab, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu, which have over 1,000 clauses each of imprisonment. Now, one can argue that once the codification of labor laws becomes effective, a lot of the criminal items embedded in the state labor regulations will probably go away. We think between 70 and 90% decriminalization may happen purely by way of executing or implementing the codes. Part 1. So some portion of the problem is chipped away. But if you look at other subjects, there are many subjects, including drugs, poisons, adulteration of foodstuff, factories, boilers, electricity. These are the subjects, including fisheries, land revenue, alcohol beverages, water, betting, gambling. These are all the areas which are typically at a state level. And union government will not be able to move the needle in ease of doing business or diluting some of these regulatory backlog or cholesterol, if you will, because the legislative process has to be taken up by the respective states. Some states, we definitely see some action. Has something happened like Jan Vishwas yet? The answer is no. But are they moving in the right direction? Yes. I mean, recently I was in Lucknow. There was a full-day workshop organized by Department of Labor, where they're already planning how to get to $1 trillion economy and what interventions may be required by Labor Department in the UP. Now, does that mean the work has been concluded and the act has been released? The answer is no. But has it started flashing on the collective consciousness of the state machinery between executive and the legislature? The answer is yes. The dialogues have started. They are still trying to get their arms around the subject, what is doable, what is not, where the challenges are. some things that may sound easy in theory are very difficult on the ground. How do you manage communication? How do you execute on this without diluting the intent of the law? All of these are areas where I can see in certain states that dialogues have started. And as they say, well begun is half done. If the dialogue has started and it is flashing on the collective consciousness of the executive, the legislature, chances are that over the period of next few months to a year or so, you will start seeing some similar action at a state level. So I think we are still far from where we envision utopia, where all 28 states and 9 union territories can aggressively start reviewing concurrently, parallelly, start identifying opportunities, start converting them into legislative and executive actions. And what Jan Vishwas has already templatized at a union level can also be done at a state legislature level. And I think we are not there yet, but with the motion that we are seeing, chances are this decade, we will certainly see a lot of action.
I think that's a very positive note to end this podcast. So we can be hopeful of regulatory reforms, and that can overall build a great business ecosystem that can push India for a Viksit Bharat. So with that, we come to the end of this episode. And thank you so much, Rishi, for joining us in this conversation and sharing your insights on this topic with our audience. And we look forward to hosting you again for more engaging discussions.
Well, Anu, thank you so much. Discussions on ease of doing business is something that I love doing. I think as a country, we are full of opportunity, we are full of possibility. I feel lucky to be born in the country in this day and age. I think next 25 years, while we still have the demographic dividend on our side, our
Right.
Honorable Prime Minister calls it the Amrit Kal. There is a huge opportunity at play, and I think ease of doing business can be one of those levers which, if leveraged well, can convert us into a Viksit Bharat by 2047.
Right, right. So thank you so much. I would also like to thank all our listeners for joining us. Thank you, everyone. We'll be back with another thought-provoking and interesting episode.